Thank you, sir, and good evening to everybody. The Smart City Mission, the funding is 1,000 crores per city, 500 crores from coming the central government, 250 crores coming from the state government, and 250 crores coming from the local body. So in effect, local body has to contribute around 50 crores per annum for the next 5 years. I think this ability to contribute 50 crores is probably there with only few local bodies in the country. Probably local bodies in Maharashtra or Gujarat can make that contribution. Other cities in the country will not be able to make that contribution. So even if you look at a city like Bhubaneswar, which is ranked first as per the Smart City Mission, the 50 crore contribution that the local body has to make will come from the state government because the local body does not have the revenues. Now we say that cities are engines of the national economy and almost 60% of our GDP comes from cities. But the irony is the cities' governments do not benefit from this economic growth. Now Udaipur is the tourist destination, Agra is a tourist destination, but does the city get any revenue from tourists? Mumbai is a financial capital but does not get any revenue, but Octroi is there thankfully. So if you look at the entire revenue base of the country, it is around 1,20,000 crores. You put all the local bodies together, that is 1% of the GDP. If you really want a smart city, it should have some money in its pocket, and that is something like 5% of GDP is required. So the deficit is 4%. Now the contention is the local body has to optimize or increase its revenue base. Now the biggest revenue base is property tax. If you put all the property tax collections in the country all together, it's 15,000 crores. In terms of percentage of GDP, it's 0.15%. If you optimize, if you do everything else, increase your tariffs, increase your rates, increase your coverage, it can go to 1,20,000 crores. That's 1% of the GDP. So earlier you had a 1% of revenue base, municipal revenue base. You increase, it goes to 1.85%. Still a deficit of around 3 to 4% of the GDP is the municipal revenue base. If you look at the fiscal devolutions from the state and the central government, it's 0.5%. So it's very little. So what is required is cities require a revenue source which is directly linked to the economic activity. And Maharashtra had that economic base because of octroi or local body tax, which is now under threat. Because that is the only revenue source which can add buoyancy to the revenues of the local body. So if you look at Maharashtra as a state, if you look at percentage of GDP, municipal revenues will be 2%. So there is still more than octroi that is required, which is required in terms of these SFC devolutions or the central finance devolutions. So unless you have a revenue base which is commensurate with the responsibility of the local government, things are going to be a big challenge. Today, local government has a lot of responsibility, but has no authority or a revenue base to discharge its obligations. So this is an irony that needs to be addressed. The other issue is in case of PPP. I think PPP is good. It's a good avenue for doing projects. But PPP, the cost of capital for the private sector is going to be much higher than what the public sector will have. Secondly, his return expectations from the project are going to be much higher. So assuming that if the public sector and the private sector both are efficient at the same level, the cost of the project for the private on PPP basis may be on a higher side. So when you have a local body which does not have a revenue base, how can it pay a higher cost to the private sector? That's the first question. Second question that always comes is municipal bonds. Municipal bonds are talked about as an avenue for financing urban infrastructure. So if you look at the past history of municipal bonds in the country, all the cities which had a revenue base which was linked to an economic activity were able to raise that bonds, be it Nasik, be it Mumbai, or for the matter even Kalyan Dombivali has been proactive in borrowing. So even that economic resource or economic source of financing municipal bodies is under threat because of GST. Once GST comes in, octroi and local body tax become unconstitutional. So what does this mean for municipal finances going forward? For a state like Maharashtra, which has got 15,000 crores of octroi or LBT revenues, with GST going, it's a problem that the state government is going to face, and how to compensate the local government. If you look at the other states, they are not devolving finances to the local bodies, and so that expenditure is not reflected in the books of accounts of the state government. So that expenditure is not counted for. So when we are moving to a GST framework, government is looking at a revenue neutral rate. The revenue neutral rate looks at all the expenditure obligations are taken care of, but there is a large expenditure of item which is not reflecting in the books of the state government, which is the devolution to the local body, which is to the extent of 4 to 5% of GDP. That is the deficit. So when the GST rate comes in, we have to look into that rate, which will take into account the devolution that needs to be taken to the local body. So sharing of local body with the local body, a share of the GST revenues is the way forward. Now the question may be asked, like Mumbai is a city which is economically vibrant, Pune is economically vibrant, Nashik is economically vibrant, and they can have a consumption which can generate that kind of revenue for their cities. So what it means that there will be a vertical inequity. Some cities will have a good revenue base, some cities will not have an Akola or a Buldana or Gadchiroli cities will not have a revenue base. So what that means that the State Finance Commission role is going to be very critical, so that they can fill this gap in revenue requirement of the local body through the state finance devolutions and for the central finance devolutions. So the bottom line is smart cities is good, it's a good concept, good movement, but there has to be a way to strengthen the municipal finances of the local bodies through revenue empowerment. I think that's the message that we have to, or the question that we need to answer. Thankfully for a city like Kalyan Dombivali, I think that's not going to be a challenge to meet the expenditure obligation under Smart City Mission. But the objective of the government that there 1 lakh crores of investments on the smart city which will get borrowed and that will leverage and to generate 2 lakh crores of investments or 3 lakh crores of investments, that may not be possible. It will be a big challenge going forward. So that's the brief message that we wanted to convey as CRISIL as far as financing of local bodies are concerned and smart cities are concerned. Thank you.